Okay, so if there's this like social injustice happening that is called gentrification, that is like displacing people, that's forcing people to start again from scratch, that's forcing people to move away from a community that they helped build. And so if there's this like, and it's happening not by accident, but it's happening because there's policies in place that help speed that up. There are incentives to bring in outsiders and people with money and to change the makeup of a neighborhood. So there's that social injustice happening. And there's specific groups of people, lower income people, many of them people of color that are affected, then you would have to care about them to stop that from happening to them. So if you don't, then you're admitting that you don't care about them. And it at the end of the day, it's a strong case to call something like that racism, to call something like that white supremacy, to call something like that classes, and then whoever admits to that has to own it, and nobody wants to own that, and the mayor doesn't want to own that, and the alderman doesn't want to own that.
Yeah, sure. Say what? He appears on the border chosen, near the border posted. Hear the offer, clear the orders, here before we coasted. Cabernet from 94, beer to pour from another ocean. You cats posing with the sword of omens. Twist foliage.
Welcome to Strong Enough, the podcast exploring the minds of millennials of color and how they go about the world. I'm Olivia Ashton, your host.
This is a vessel for that cosmic signal. We translate the program, concept simple. Dance along ecliptic, prance around the world, take the form of mystic and dress realistic and speak a naked truth under mischief. Presently gifted, the future holds.
Nobody wants to own that. That was Miguel, a 32-year-old Latinx and educator who devotes much of his time to promoting meaningful and purposeful dialogue about gentrification. It's easy to get caught up on the running jokes about artisanal cupcake shops and hipster cafes, but on this bonus episode, we want to turn our attention to real, concrete examples of why gentrification is and has been such an injustice.
Bites is polysyllabic, multi-dynamic, capture in sight. Slightly mechanic, running with panic, rapture and dite. Lightly go tantric, almighty show antic. He the master of mics, a master device who mastered his life.
I was brought here by my mom. My father was already here prior to 1960. So my mom and me came, from Mexico to join my father, and like the rest of the family, my grandfather had moved down here with my father, and in 1960 we joined them, and I've been living in Pilsen ever since.
Meet Martha. Martha is a Chicago public school teacher and executive board member of Pilsen Alliance, a grassroots social justice organization serving Chicago's Lower West Side. Javi sat down with Martha to talk about the neighborhood they love and hope not to lose.
When we first came to Chicago, we were living on 17th and Carpenter. There was a fire in the building that we lived in, and after that fire, this house here that I'm living in now was up for sale, and my parents bought it. So yeah, I went to school here. I was in school, elementary school at Youngman, and that went up to 6th grade. After Youngman, I went to Cooper Upper Grade Center. That was 7th and 8th grade. And unfortunately, there was not a high school, I want to say a safe high school. There was one called Froebel High School, which was on 21st and Damon, I want to say. And it was a very old building. And I went there for my freshman year. And after freshman year, they had to tear it down because it was sometime in the fall. You know how the wind is just so, we would have those really windy falls, and bricks started flying, off of the building. It was
the
really
wind?
windy
From the wind?
from the building. Yeah,
some
and
wind.
kids were being dismissed. This was after school, and we start seeing like chunks of bricks just flying. And so the next day, some community activists and students, we sort of rallied around each other, and we protested, and we were pushing for another high school, because the nearest one, the school that I went to, Froebel, was only 9th grade. So my parents, they had to figure out where I was going to go. There was no Benito Juarez back then,
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and so I'm talking, like, let's see, 74, I think. Anyway, I can't remember. Anyway, I was a freshman at Froebel High School, and that was the only one available, because the next high school that was closer by was in Little Village, which used to be Harrison High School, and that one had a lot of problems, as far as crime. Girls were getting raped in the bathrooms, and it was really bad. And so the only alternative that my parents had at the time was to send me to a Catholic school, which was very hard on them, because they were both working. They each had 2 jobs, just to try to pay for this house and support the kids that were living here. There's 6 of us. It was it was hard, because we had to make a lot of my parents had to make a lot of financial like sacrifices. There was one high school, St. Anne's, which was on 18th and Levitt, and I went there for my sophomore year after after Froebel, because when I was talking about earlier about the building being so dilapidated, it was old, and the following year, I think, is when they just the city just tore it down. Now they're townhomes, but it took a lot of like neighborhood activists, and some of us students still rallied to try to push for for a high school. And after a couple of years, they finally had they built Benito Juarez high schools. My parents had some compadres that lived in some suburb. I can't even remember the suburb, but I know we all got in the car and we would travel. It seemed like an hour drive, and their house looked beautiful. I mean, they had like the kids they had, each of them had their room, but then of course they didn't have 6 kids like my parents did, They had 3 kids. But they each had their room. There was, they had a driveway, and the block just looked beautiful. The sidewalks and everything. Our sidewalks were crappy. You were walking on the sidewalk, and there was a broken, you had, I fell plenty of times, and then winters, the snowstorms. Our neighborhood was always the last one to get, cleaned up. The trucks wouldn't even come around here. Whereas you'd go to, nearby suburbs, again, you would see, everything is clean, and then they even had a place to store their own, snow blowers or whatever, and we couldn't, we're small home, big family, and, just the resources, like our garbage wouldn't get picked up often. Sometimes, it'd be a whole week and we wouldn't get, our garbage picked up. In the winter, forget it. They wouldn't even come around. When the snow was there, we just, put stuff in bags and then just, it just seemed like, we would get like, we were rat infested, and then, it just wasn't the same feeling, and I think it did a lot for, like our self-esteem. You felt that because you were brown, that people, or back then I'm thinking, whoever was in charge, our government wasn't really thinking about us. It was, just for the widows, I think I was 12 years old and I already knew that there was a difference, I didn't want to live here. Mm-hmm. I wanted to have that house, that the compadres had. And, we even behaved different when we were at their house, And, when I was in school, I didn't say much. I did everything my teachers told me to because I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to be, like a troublemaker or speak my mind, but you get tired after a while, And I think that's why, when you asked me earlier, like why a teacher and why here, and well, I just think that my voice had been turned off, for a long time, and then now, I'm in a position where I could actually have some type of voice in this community, Yeah. And it took this long, and seeing the neighborhood go through so many changes.
How are we doing, y'all? No, really, how are we doing? Radical Colors is a site dedicated to conveying the experiences of millennials of color. Strong Enough is a podcast that explores how these experiences affect our mental health. If you like our content and want to see more, then please support this project. To make a donation, visit our site at radicalcolors.com/donate. We are a completely independent news site, and no donation is too small. If your bank account isn't set up for that kind of life just yet, we understand. There are so many other ways you can support Radical Colors. For more information about how to contribute to Radical Colors, visit radicalcolors.com/contribute. You can reach us anytime at radicalpoc@gmail.com.
Contribute to the Pilsen Community Market. We also help contribute to the Pilsen children's cooking classes.
So is this, I just want to say, I understand, your little token philanthropy that you do, but your mere presence, this fine dining presence, contributes to gentrification.
Just last month, DNA Info published one of its last stories on a very biased account of an argument between a new restaurant manager, Charles Ford of Sky, and activists from community organization Shy Resists. A group of California-based activists, Defend Boyle Heights, recorded a walking tour of Pilsen via Facebook Live that was hosted by Shy Resists. About halfway during the video, a brief stop by the new development led to an unplanned discussion with Ford. Just 3 minutes later, Ford called the police and the group moved on. The author, Ariel Chung, published the article just days after the altercation with the headline, "Anti-gentrifiers say new Pilsen restaurant puts, quote, our lives in danger," end quote.
I'm sorry, I'm not here to argue with you guys. I do.
This is the community.
It's not an argument, it's a fact. It's a fact, when it's a danger to our lives. Literally, our lives are in danger because you are here. And I feel like you don't understand that, and I'm really saddened by that.
Calm down.
You came out, that's why.
If If you'd like more context to the story, you can find the link to the Facebook Live video and the DNA info article in the episode description below. Miguel met with Javi and myself to walk us through what happened in Pilsen that night and talk to us about gentrification in Chicago.
And I was sort of talking about the way that like brown bodies, black bodies in gentrified neighborhoods tend to be sort of villainized, and residents tend to be villainized when they're not appearing or active in the process of gentrification. So you start to see more police harassment of like locals that are hanging out on the street. And, you know, as I mentioned, I'm from back of the yards, you know, so like I get upset at seeing like gentrification for a lot of reasons, you know, that I see it as a class issue, but I also see it as an erasure of like a culture and the marginalizing of people of color and the power that we have politically as people that live in a big city and in the center of a big city. And so when we're pushed out of the city, that we lose that political power, you know. So for me, it's upsetting for all those reasons. I live in the neighborhood, so it's upsetting for me for that reason. But a lot of the people in our group, the majority, are like born and raised here. And so I think about like my frustration. I have a lot of frustration. I have a lot of anger. Now imagine theirs. Like they grew up here. Right. Their parents grew up here. Some of their parents couldn't afford to keep their homes. And so some of they saw their best friends displaced. So when we were walking up there, there were some members of our group that were pissed off, right? And so they saw this business, and they were, you know, so we passed by the windows, and here are like, I guess the waiters, servers of the inside, and the manager like cleaning wine glasses. Now imagine what that feels like to someone that grew up here and is now, and some of us in that group there's an age range of like from like 18 to 30, 31, and like, so imagine seeing that as someone that has seen their neighborhood and their culture erased. And so that's really upsetting. So some of the reactions were angry, you know, and they were like, you know, and they were saying like, fuck you, like, you know, and so they were really upset by it. There was never a plan to like draw those people outside of the restaurant and confront them. So that happened. They were upset. They, you know, maybe threw some middle fingers at the window, said "fuck you," right? That in the context of like, or that in the context of gentrification is nothing. Right. It's nothing. It's a super valid response. It makes a lot of sense. It doesn't hurt anyone to the extent that gentrification has hurt like people in this community. To us, it makes sense. Obviously, to the public and with the larger narrative of gentrification that favors wealthy people, that favors developers, that favors the mayor, that favors anybody that has the financial ability to gentrify a neighborhood, it looks bad. But the truth is about that video is that, or that moment, was that we didn't mean to draw out anyone, right? It was just one of these like, let's get this frustration out and move on, right? So it was funny that as we were walking away, the manager came out. I guess that's in the video, right? Mm-hmm. He comes out and he kind of says, "Hey, what's going on? Like, what's happening?" And that's it was. And we were kind of shocked because it was kind of confrontational and on his behalf, right? He's like, "Hey, what's going on? Can I help you? And then that's when the sort of like back and forth happened, right? Now, I think it wouldn't have gotten to the extent that it did if it wasn't for him sort of making these statements like, "You're lucky, or we're here." And he said something like, "Do you know what was here before?" Oh, right, yeah. It was a vacant, the condescending.
Like, you tell me. Like,
you tell me, what was this? And it's like, it was a vacant building, but it was a medical center before that. And then the statement about the Filipino chef. And so all of those things were so much more upsetting.
It rehearsed too. Like,
I know.
They already put the press release, and he was just trying to grab them from the
It was funny. A friend of mine was saying that this is like that whole thing was so surreal that it was kind of like someone's living dissertation, like on gentrification, right? Like all the arguments were present, all the different sort of characters were there. So yeah, so once that happened, I think that really upset folks, right? And again, the unfortunate thing about some situations like that is that usually those people that are hurt the most have the burden of like having to be or we're given this burden of like being clear-headed and thoughtful in the moment, and it's usually those people that are hurt and that are dealing with like all this sort of like pent up frustration, anger, rightfully so, that in that moment we're expected to be really clear-headed and clear-minded, when in the moment it was really upsetting, you know. And so to see that restaurant come up, and then to hear those kind of like really offensive remarks by the manager, yeah. So yeah, I think that's that. Oh yeah, I forgot. Then it was that I forgot, almost called the cops on us. I forgot about. He did call the cops on us.
I didn't count the actual time. It was like, was it 2 minutes? It was like 2 to 3 minutes.
Oh, that's yeah. He went from
not talking for long.
No, he went from we want to be a member of the community. Here are my talking points to then I'm calling the police. And so so we thought we were saying like that's gentrification in a nutshell, you know, like we want to hear you out. We want to give money to, I think he said he'd give money to a farmer's market. I don't know what else. Community market. Class, yeah, cooking class. I don't know what else. And then, and it never really escalated beyond that. It was just this like argument, right? We did nothing, didn't touch him, didn't threaten him, anything for him to go from 1 second, participating in that back and forth, which he was a part of, and that's the thing. I think in the public, people don't see him as being aggressive, but his comments are aggressive. His the things he said were offensive, right? And so he participated in that as much as we did. So yeah, then he called the police on us, and he was out there waiting for the police to come by. And sure enough, I mean, once we walked away, there's police cars kind of like following us after that. To Castellan and passing by every few minutes and looking at us out there, but yeah.
Did they come after y'all?
No, they didn't.
To Castellan?
No, we were just outside in front of Castellan, but yeah, they were just passing by pretty frequently, and yeah. So that was it was shocking that that whole thing went down.
Another huge thing is, like, as you said, that while Pilsen's population overall has plummeted by nearly 15% from 2000 to 2010, the biggest drop, 41%, was in the number of families with children living in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's not many families anymore. It's becoming more and more younger people.
Yeah. And, it's also sad because then you see the churches too, that are losing parishioners, and now some of them are looking at maybe closing. Yes, we have and have had the gang violence. It was still rich with with culture, and people understood, like our neighbors were actually our neighbors, being neighborly,
Right.
And we understand each other. I'm lucky, in this block that most of the people that are on this block have been here for a while, and that's because they became owners of the homes, so it's sad, that they've had to move out, and I don't know, our higher ups, are they just push a lot to drive people out. In every way, maybe treating people differently. You see the vendor, they get ticketed, so there's all this stuff happening, at the same time that, sometimes you don't blame people for, wanting to leave.
Something that I noticed, like in what you were saying, is about how a lot of what Pilsen, it sounds like, a lot of what Pilsen had and the resources that they had have always been really, really like fought for. You know, a lot of a lot of like the political activism that you see happening here, it's great and not that great to hear that it was going on way back when. I mean, it's great because it's like, it's good to hear that people were fighting for their rights back then, but it's also sad because it's like they're still fighting, still fighting.
Yeah, and you think, you know, things would improve, but then there's other people that, you know, come up with different projects and different, you know, reasons for doing something. You know, sometimes you feel like it's not always, you know, for the benefit of the people that are here, you know. Now it's for the benefit of somebody else, you know. I sometimes feel like, well, we haven't gotten that far, you know. Sometimes I feel like we're going backwards again.
So, yeah, so in what ways, I was going to ask generally as well, so what changes do you see in Pilsen?
A lot of the, you know, the small stores that, you know, people had, like the Mexican bakeries, you know, there was one not too far from here, right before you get to Racine, that one's closed. We had a restaurant, you know, a Mexican restaurant, right across the street from Cuernavaca, which is now La Vaca, you know. Yeah. So, like, all those, you know, things, some people just can't afford, you know, living here anymore, when it used to be an area that was very affordable, you know, and now it's not affordable. As far as, you know, like the things that have changed, you know, it does look different, you know. You know, like the little shops that they have now, you know, before they used to be like secondhand stores. And, you know, now they are, but it's vintage.
It's vintage, or it's ironic almost.
Yeah,
it's like now it's like, now it can be like a vintage old store with lots of random crap in it, but it's cool and trendy.
Yeah, and I wonder who buys this stuff, but I guess somebody must be buying them, you know.
When I was started like researching gentrification, like some of the earlier like research on it uses funny language, but it's totally on cue of like what gentrifying businesses are, and they call it like conspicuous consumption. Right? Yeah, me too. I like it too. It's a cool term. I laughed when I first saw it because the way that it was described, it was like conspicuous consumption, like artisanal bread, and that is a cue of like what kind of a business is not for people of color or lower income, or I should say, lower income folks that tend to be people of color. It's these conspicuous consumptions, these places that offer not just like your typical transaction of like, oh, I need some juice, I'm gonna go buy some juice, but it's like a social event, and it's specifically a social experience that is for like higher status. So Sky is serving lobster dumplings or something, lobster dumplings or something like that, right? Like that is a sort of a luxury of some sort, right? And it is this conspicuous consumption. It's something that that you're paying more for, not because it's better, but because it offers a social experience that you can sort of share with others of that same status. And so I think that was what my neighbor meant, right? That it's like, oh no, I'm looking at this place and it is people that are well dressed or that are dressed with expensive clothing or expensive looking clothing. They're all sharing this space. They have that in common. This is an event that clearly has some kind of consensus of what you're supposed to look like. And in a lot of cases that is white and white that are, you know, appearing of high status, and so that's why that's not for me. And so I think that tends to be the case, right? That the businesses that are opening that are for not for residents, that are for outsiders, that are for higher status folks, tend to be offering more of a sort of social experience that therefore costs more.
Do you think that the younger people living here now, who are now calling Pilsen home, do you think that they have a responsibility to?
You know, I feel that it's up to us, those of us that have experienced, to educate, you know, these younger kids. You know, that's one thing that I really admire about, you know, Pilsen Alliance, is that they want to keep it young too. You know, I mean, they call on us, you know, the ones that have been here, you know, like the statues, you know, and but they're still, you know, at this last meeting they were updating me, and you know, we just took in a young couple, and I was like so happy, because you know, that keeps me, you know, motivated also, you know, to see that there's you know, another generation that, you know, is also in this fight. And now with, you know, with Trump saying all that stuff that he's saying, you know, he's causing a lot of problems. I'm feeling like, you know, people of the white race, you know, they feel like they have, somebody's got their back, and that they can speak, they can push, they can, you know, mistreat, you know, a person. The other day my daughter was saying, you know, oh my God, this lady, she was white, you know, she says, she didn't even say excuse me, she just pushed me out of the way. You can't help but to think, you know, oh my God, this is, you know, what this guy says is like trickling down to, you know, how people are.
Se están poniendo bravos.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think I saw somebody on the bus as well, similar story. And I don't know about you, but almost when I do see someone who's white and acting very entitled, and in Pilsen, that almost like, that kills me even more, because I'm like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I was in the bus, and there was a Mexican woman, and the driver was Mexican as well, and they were just kikiing and laughing, and the Mexican woman was older, and she was laughing, so she was taking a little bit longer to get off of the bus.
Yeah.
And this white woman was just like so impatient, so upset. She's like, well, you're talking, like, I don't know what you're saying. Like, they're speaking in Spanish. She's like, you're talking, like, are you getting on, are you getting off? And just very angry. And
so I notice, like, on Fridays, you know, when I go out for my walk, these, you know, kids are coming and going, you know, going to Simone's, or they're going to La Vaca, you know, because now that's the spot. And, like, nobody says hello. Nobody, you know, everybody, because, like, oh my God, like, where did all these people come from, you know? And it's just weird, you know, being here, but...
What positive work have you seen young people in Pilsen doing?
Well, I feel that that they're fighting, you know, like, for issues that also have to do with, you know, with education, like conserving art. So there's like art projects, you know, like Pilsen is known to have like the murals, and you know, and you just go down 16th Street, and there's, you know, there's a you know, the art there, you know, and I love to, you know, to see our youth being, you know, creative in that sense. And, you know, it's good to hear, and it's good to know that they're still, you know, they're still pushing for that. It keeps a lot of, you know, kids, you know, off the streets. They're still on the street, but they're not doing, you know, the stuff they're not supposed to. They're putting their talents, you know, their other talents to, you know, to work. And so there's, you know, stuff with immigration, you know, reform, and I see a lot of young kids, you know, coming out. They're reaching out to one another because they're in those situations where they could, you know, run the risk of being sent, you know, their families could be torn, you know, apart. And so that's where I see, you know, that makes me really proud, and something that, you know, the government is like not thinking about that. But, you know, I feel that the younger kids now, you know, are really facing a different struggle, and that they really have to make their voices heard, and I'm proud to see that they are, that they are, like the technology behind all of this, like something, that I need to know. Boom, I get a text, and somebody's behind all that, it's our young kids, I think our youth is doing a lot. The racial, inequalities, I think there's always going to be, somebody that's going to, try to put a stop to, to the justice. But I don't know. I think that our young kids in this area still have that, that desire, to make things better for themselves too. It's, it's not easy living here. I don't think it's ever been easy. And I don't know if I could live anywhere else.
You've kind of gotten used to all of the bad. It's always been a fight to live here.
It's always been a fight. Yeah.
Flies polarized, fortified with the illness. A lot of pushing concentration to kill this. The metamorphosize and energize with the realness. Daily odor moonwalk.
We'd like to give our sincere thanks to Martha and Miguel for sharing their stories with us. If you'd like to share your story with Strong Enough, please email us at radicalpoc@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at radical_colors. For more information about the Strong Enough podcast, visit our site at radicalcolors.com/strongenough. Thank you so much for listening. And until the next episode, take care.